One of the lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic is that Europe needs a more robust civil protection system, a system of the kind that would be able to respond quickly and effectively to an emergency that affects a large number or even all EU member states. What we have had in place so far was a bit different. It was a system of civil protection that relied exclusively on solidarity among member states, in the sense that it depended on voluntary offers of assistance to a member state that requested it. This system has worked very well in all situations of emergency of a limited scope, a scope that was limited to one or few member states. But it is not very effective in cases where a large number or all EU member states are affected at the same time. You will recall that there was a request for assistance at the end of February by one member state for medical equipment which went unanswered. And that prompted us to start working on creating a RescEU reserve capacity at the EU level, which would enable us to avoid such situations in future. To put it simply, we proposed to strengthen the European response capacities by expanding the scope of the RescEU, that is strategic reserve assets at the EU level that can be mobilized quickly. How would such expanded RescEU look? It would include, for example, medical equipment, medical evacuation planes, field hospitals, firefighting planes and helicopters, and other assets that can be mobilized quickly in case of emergencies of various kinds, like health emergencies, forest fire outbreaks, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear incidents, or other major emergencies. Secondly, we would also propose to strengthen the mandate of the Commission so that the EU would be able to directly procure such capacities and thereby ensure a safety net of emergency response assets that can support EU member states in a situation of an overwhelming crisis. Thirdly, we also propose to make it possible for the European Union to fully finance the development and operational costs of such RescEU capacities. Finally, as you know, in the European Union we have several sectoral crisis mechanisms. They all remain essential. However, we would propose to place the Emergency Response Coordination Centre at the centre, with such a stronger ERCC that would serve as a hub for the network of national crisis centres. We would strengthen coordination so as to support the Union's swift and effective response to a broad range of crises, both at home in the Union as well as abroad. Such reinforced RescEU would ensure that the Union would be well equipped to support member states and citizens when national capacities are overwhelmed. Of course, all this requires additional funding. That is why the Commission is proposing a substantial next generation EU funding boost in the amount of €2 billion for RescEU. That would bring it to 3.1 billion in total for the EU civil protection mechanism over the next 7 years. On humanitarian aid, I would firstly like to underline the fact that the European Union and its member states are the major largest donor of humanitarian aid in the world. But even so, one has to admit that the needs for humanitarian assistance are rising faster than this humanitarian aid itself. In order to address this growing funding gap, which is bound to be aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic, we propose also a reinforced humanitarian aid budget for the next multi-annual financial framework. Already before the pandemic, the budget that we had available in the European Union for humanitarian aid has proved to be insufficient to address even the most acute humanitarian needs. That's why from year to year, we have asked for ad hoc reinforcement of our budget. At the same time, if we look ahead, we see that the most recent projections of the needs for humanitarian aid show to dramatic increase of these needs. The UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has issued its assessment last December, before the COVID-19 pandemic, and in it projected that 168 million people around the world would need humanitarian assistance in year 2020. That is up from 136 million in 2018. This is the highest figure in decades. What is worse, it is projected to grow further and reach by 2022 the figure of 212 million. 212 million people in need of humanitarian aid. Secondly, we should not forget the challenges that are represented by climate change and some, let's call it, traditional threats like conflicts, food insecurity, and deadly outbreaks of infectious diseases other than COVID-19, diseases like cholera, measles, or Ebola. All this due to inadequate health, water, and sanitation services. Conflict and disaster triggered more than 33 million new internal displacement last year across more than 100 countries. The number of people that have been forced to flee their homes is the highest since the World War II. Today, there are more than 70 million of them. Thirdly, when you bring in the COVID pandemic, we can already see that it has had a severe impact, indirect impact, one could say, for long-term social and economic situation. The direct impact of the pandemic is hitting people in fragile states and ongoing humanitarian crisis particularly hard. The UN Global Humanitarian Response Plan for COVID-19 has been more than tripled in less than 2 months, and it now stands at almost $7 billion. The pandemic is already generating additional humanitarian impacts in areas like health, water, sanitation, and hygiene, but also in logistics due to movement restrictions linked to COVID-19 measures. All this is expected to worsen as a result of the worldwide economic recession. So this is why the Commission proposes a substantial increase in the next long-term budget for EU humanitarian aid, so that in total it would reach almost 15 billion euro, of which 5 billion under the Next Generation EU. Finally, Emergencies are by definition unpredictable. That's why we propose to reinforce the flexible instrument called Solidarity and Emergency Aid Reserve. This is a special instrument which would allow us to respond quickly to unforeseen needs. I will stop here and I will be happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your very detailed introduction. And indeed, now we will take it to the questions. Those of you who wish to ask one, please raise your hand. I will wait a little bit. There's quite a bit of interest today in this topic. I'm going to start with Susanna Frex. Please unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Good morning. Well, first of all, I have